Do you know how fast the speed of sound is? 1,225 kilometers an hour. The speed of this plane was 3 times the speed of sound, and it could carry up to 250 passengers. This concept could go from Los Angeles to New York, which usually takes 6 hours, in under 2 hours. If you know about the 1960s, you'll know that scientists and inventors were really thinking of the future back then. They were thinking of inventions that has not been made to this day, things like laser guns. This was the decade that they sent the first satellites to space and actually landed on the moon. In terms of airplanes, it was a very important year because it went from impeller old school airplanes to jet engines. In the 1950s, old passenger impeller planes would go from New York to London in 15 hours. Just imagine being a passenger to those planes. 4 engines are spinning, and under you it's just ocean. And you have to be in there for 15 hours. But when you get to the 1960s, jet engines created a revolution. It turns the 15 hours to under 7 hours. People were really excited about these jet engines, and they thought the innovation was speeding up so fast that very soon they're gonna be flying in F-4 Phantoms to the other side of the world. And that makes New York to London flight time under 3 hours. These thoughts and ideas made the 1960s a race to make better and faster airplanes. Different companies started to design different types of plane, and the idea was to create a passenger aircraft that was supersonic. Every airplane company pretty much said it is very much possible to build a plane like this, but when they calculated, it was never profitable, or it would cost so much money it would not be worth it at all. Most companies stopped trying to make this idea work, but the British and French did not give up. In 1962, they started the Concorde project. Few months after this announcement, the Soviets thought they're gonna stay behind and announced they're gonna make the Tupolev 144. Building the Tu-144 never got serious, but in those years, building the Concorde got more serious every day, and the US was watching from afar. They knew it was going to be expensive, but they were on the lookout that if it's successful, they gotta build one too. In the 1960s, the biggest airliner in the world was Pan American. When Pan American noticed that they're building the Concorde, they said that if you guys actually build it, we'll buy it. In the year 1963, before John F. Kennedy was assassinated, he said that we will build a supersonic passenger aircraft as well. The US government gave an order to different aircraft companies to build a plane like this. It should travel at Mach 3, carry more than 150 passengers, and have a reasonable running cost. Lockheed, North American Aviation, and Boeing turned in their designs. And in 1967, the government decided to go with Boeing's design. The plane that they've chosen was the Boeing 2707. This plane was basically a giant fighter jet, but it was meant for passengers. You guys know the F-14 Tomcat. If you don't know, we've made a video about it. But either way, the wing design of the 2707 was exactly like the F-14. When it wants to take off or land, it opens up its wings, but after it takes off, it closes the wings, and now it can easily go supersonic. Designing this wing for this aircraft was genius, and it allowed it to fly at Mach 3, and that's 3 times the speed of sound, or 3,675 kilometers an hour. The design of the engines was very similar to the SR-71, and it's good to know that we've made a video about the SR-71 as well. But unlike the SR-71 engine design, these 4 were all the way in the back. When an aircraft goes this fast, one of the biggest issues is its body getting very hot, and that means the traditional aluminum used in other airplanes will not do the job. And that means Boeing, just like the SR-71, has to make the body out of titanium. This insane speed puts tremendous pressure on the body of this aircraft, and that means they can't put traditional size windows on this plane. The windows were about 6 inches in diameter. Boeing announced that it could have this plane ready in about 3 years, and that means in 1970 we can hand the keys over, but we need the money. Just like we said, the entire body of this airplane has to be made with titanium. Not only is titanium an extremely expensive metal, but working with it and the engineers you need are gonna be very expensive. In 1967, the design of the wings was very futuristic for its time, and the technology they had back then, it seemed impossible. Either way, Boeing gave a price on how much they need to build this thing, but we don't know how much it was. It seems like the government declined the offer and said make it a little cheaper. The most expensive part of the 2707 was the wing design, and to make it cheaper, they decided to ditch that wing design and put the traditional giant wing style, and this time it was stationary instead of adjustable. One of the biggest problems for these aircrafts is that if it wants to fly over your head or over a city, this is what the people will hear. This is a sonic boom, and it sounds like a bomb exploding. They predicted that if this plane were to fly from New York to Los Angeles, 5 million people are gonna hear sonic booms all over the US. To see what the people will think, they chose Oklahoma City as a victim, and they decided to send aircrafts over the city to create sonic booms. The fighter jets would go above the city and break the sound barrier over and over, but it seems like it pissed the people off because 15,000 people called and complained about the noise. Because of the sonic boom, the government of the US kind of lost hope in this project. They told themselves, if 15,000 people are gonna call and complain for a test, just imagine different airliners flying across the US and making this noise. In 1969, when Richard Nixon became president, this project was still alive, but the government was starting to lose hope. The first year Nixon came into presidency, this is what he had to say. He said, "I know that this plane is expensive, but us as Americans have to build this airplane." But either way, in 1971, the Senate of the US voted to stop this project, and they stopped funding it. After the Senate voting took place, the 2707 died. And 2 years later, in 1973, the FAA, no supersonic aircrafts is allowed to pass over continental USA. In the 1960s, everybody thought that in the 1970s, everybody's gonna fly around in fighter jets. But in the 1970s, there was only 14 Concordes available and flying around. And they were only in Air France and British Airways. The Europeans didn't know what they got themselves into, and they didn't know what kind of a failure it was gonna be. Even though the Concorde was made and it was successful, but the US wasn't worried because this idea wasn't good to begin with. A lot of experts have said back then that the Concorde will be a failure, and it seems like that came true. The years that it actually worked, not only did it not make money, but it lost a lot of money and caused a few disasters. With this clip, you might have understand what the 1960s was like. The people in the 1960s thought they're gonna ride on rockets around the world, and it was gonna get faster year by year. We've advanced a lot, but not in the places we thought we would. You could say supersonic passenger aircrafts belong to the 1960s.